morning, and we'll hope that it all comes out okay. But meanwhile, we are in 1 Kings 11. We have this wonderful Mother's Day Sunday school lesson out of 1 Kings 11. It says, King Solomon loved many foreign women. There's got to be a mother in there somewhere. Right? Oh, man. So here we are. I have stuck this back up because we were kind of having this. This is the little summary things from Solomon's dedication prayer to the temple, where he requested, God, would you do these things for the nation? And the first one was to do justice between neighbors when they wrong each other. One was if they're defeated for the enemy and realize, oh my gosh, we shouldn't be defeated. God's supposed to be fighting our enemies for us. There must be something wrong. And when you pray to the temple, that God would restore them, forgive their sin. Same thing if there's no rain. Remember, the land that flows with milk and honey is supposed to be good agricultural production. And when you have problems with crop production due to lack of rain and everything, they were supposed to go, why is this? Well, it's El Nino, of course. Why, everybody knows that. Right? Well, it was because God said, I'm trying to get your attention. The other one was famine due to a number of things, whether it be weather or insects or an enemy that came in and wiped out all your food stores or whatever it would be that would cause famine. Again, the land was supposed to be prosperous. There had been lots of production, enough for them to grow and exist. And so when there's a famine, it was supposed to be a heads up and turn you back to God. There was supposed to be the issue of foreigners that would come there because they had heard about the land, heard about how God had blessed these people, and they came and believing wanted to offer their sacrifices. Would you accept their sacrifices? Because they heard the testimony of your nation. And so that was supposed to be one of them. Support when God called them to go to battle. That God would not, if he called them to go to war, to do his battles, would God, then the prayer was, and we pray towards this place, that you will support us in that combat, and you will uphold us. And the last one, the most interesting one to me, is they brought up, when we find ourselves captive in a foreign land and say, why are we here? And we turn back towards Jerusalem and towards that temple, in other words, towards the face of God, the presence of God, which that represented, and say, boy, have we messed up. What are we doing here? You know, you're like the son who finds himself feeding hogs out there and go, wait a minute, this is crazy. My father's servants are better off than that. And turn back here and listen to us. So we've been kind of keeping these in the back of our minds as we look at the end of Solomon's reign, as things are winding down and he has all these wives that are starting to lead him astray. And what we're finding is that we don't have, or at least I have not yet found evidence that some of these things are happening specifically. There's a couple of them that there are hints at, we'll see today. But I don't know about these, but it really is interesting that the gods that he started turning towards to worship are the gods that answer supposedly these issues. That you go pray to the storm god for rain, you pray to the god of fertility and everything, and you make those offerings to try to get... So it looks like his wives are telling him, you want these things to happen, you got to pray to our gods. You've got to worship our God. You've got to make those offerings and those sacrifices. And it looks like if they had hints of these going on, he's taken the popular advice and has turned away from those. And God's sitting there rattling his cage, trying to get his attention, and it's not working. This morning, we're going to look at that he has, yes?
Is that the United States?
I'm sorry?
Is that the United States?
Is that the United States? Interesting that you should say that. I don't know. You know, obviously it's not directed towards us directly because we're not the Jewish nation. But you can certainly see, could God be firing shots across our bow to get our attention, to get the church's attention by some of the things that are happening around us? You know, he doesn't change. He still is gracious. He still tries to get our attention when we're headed the wrong direction. Could be.
Well, there's a lesson in it
It's a
no matter
principle
what,
there. Yeah.
wherever you live. There's a lesson right
And
there.
God says he disciplines those he loves, that he won't let them just go their way without trying to turn them back and correct them. Every son that he loves, he disciplines, and so, you know, he's going to try to get your attention to call you back one way or another. And so that principle sure stands, and our nation could probably take a little lesson from that. We have some hints about some of these things, maybe defeated before an enemy and some of those kinds of difficulties, in that God goes out of his way in this to tell us about rather some adversaries that pop up. And so if you want to look at verse 14, we have the Lord raising up an adversary to Solomon. So here's one place we know God was causing him problems, and Solomon's supposed to be what his name says,
Man of peace.
man of peace. And the whole idea was that in his reign they were supposed to have had peace. And then God says, the Lord raised up an adversary to Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was of the royal line of Edom. And Joab, the commander of the army, had gone up to bury the slain and struck down every male in Edom. So Joab, back in David's time, had gone up there and they had done what they were commanded to do, and they had cleaned out this area. Sounds horrible in our way of thinking today, but shows you how desperately wicked God viewed that these people would be destroyed. It says, Joab and all Israel stayed there, verse 16, for 6 months until he had cut off every male in Edom. And during that time, Hadad fled to Egypt, he and certain Edomites of his father's servants with him, while Hadad, was a young boy. And they arose from Midian, came to Haran, and they took men with them from Haran and came to Egypt, to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who gave him a house and assigned him food and gave him land. And while he was down there, in verse 19, Hadad had found great favor before Pharaoh, so that he gave him in marriage the sister of his own wife, the sister of Tahpenes the queen. And the sister of Tahpenes bore his son Genubath, whom Tahpenes weaned in Pharaoh's house. And Genubath was in Pharaoh's house among the sons of Pharaoh. But when Hadad heard in Egypt that David slept with his fathers, and that Joab, the commander of the army, was dead, Hadad said to Pharaoh, send me away, that I may go to my own country. And Pharaoh, of course, liked him and said, but what have you lacked with me, that behold, you are seeking to go to your own country? He answered, nothing. Nevertheless, you must surely let me go. So here we have a guy from Edom. His country is overrun and wiped out. He escapes with a few advisors. They head down through the desert, and my map is gone. Oh my gosh, what did I do? Headed south down there. So they headed for Egypt and found a home down there, which is interesting that it's almost like a parallel to the nation of Israel, too, who ended up down there and who got in good with Pharaoh, and everybody liked everybody, you know. Got this great thing going down there. And now Hadad, as he's been there a few years now, finds out David is gone. And now he says, I'm going home. It's safe now. So he's come up, and it says that he raised this adversary to Solomon way back when Solomon was just beginning. And he comes home, and you got to believe, it doesn't tell us what Hadad was doing, but you got to believe that there's rumblings going on over there that Solomon's worried about. Because there's an adversary over there in Edom, and they're starting to build strength. And you'll see it really explode later as we go through this study. You'll start to see the various kings that had battles with Edom, and it's back and forth, and they have victory over the Jews, and the Jews go back over and have victory over them, and you just see this constant from here on out going on. So we've got this adversary raised up there in Edom that God's bringing him along, and he's using him. I think they probably had some skirmishes somewhere. And Solomon should have been going, wait a minute. We're supposed to have peace. We're supposed to have God establishing this land. Why is Edom coming back to life again? What's going on? So there's one. And then he raised up another one. Rezon, the son of Elida, who had fled from his lord Hadadezer, king of Zobah. Don't you wish you lived in Zobah? And he gathered men to himself and became leader of a marauding band. Oh, sound familiar? You listen to the news in Afghanistan lately, the marauding bands, there you go. The fighters that come down out of the mountains, make their attack, go back up. We call that guerrilla warfare.
Things ain't changed a whole lot, have they?
Now, things haven't changed one bit. The strategies have been there a long time, haven't they? Same sort of deal. You bet.
And that's what David and his band were.
Well, sure. Yeah, he was kind of a guerrilla band, working the Philistines and everybody back and forth. Yeah.
Wasn't David a marauding band when Saul was? Okay, that's what it is.
Yeah.
But what is marauding? Is that I think there's a difference between David wasn't taking villages and slaying people and stealing their stuff. Could it be that's what this guy was doing?
Yeah, that's what he would have been doing. They would have been going, the way they got their supplies and things would be go into a village, clean out the food stores,
Oh, okay.
whatever they could get.
David
And
was more of a
escape.
militia.
David was fighting, though he would go into the Philistines and did some marauding, but it was for the purpose of saving his people,
Yeah.
Israel. These guys are doing it. This is their survival technique. They are this band of marauders there. And he's gathering a following. It says, after David slew them of Zobah, and they went to Damascus and stayed there and reigned in Damascus. Well, Damascus is way up north. Syria. You heard Damascus is in the news again. And the marauding bands are still at it over there. So, like X says, nothing new. It's still happening. So here they are up there north. And so he was an adversary to Israel all the days of Solomon. And along with the evil that Hadad did, he abhorred Israel and reigned over Syria. He hated them. So he's looking for every opportunity. So Solomon ought to have been uncomfortable with that. There had to be some villages that faced this because of marauding bands. And this prayer specifically mentions that an enemy would come in and do this very thing. That if that happens, you need to go, oh, wait a minute, why is this happening to our nation? Solomon seems to have decided to deal with it another way, run down and put an altar up to the god of war and deal with that. So if that's not bad enough, we've got an enemy over here. I'm going to have to give in. Quick and dirty here. We've got an enemy over here and an enemy up there. So we've got these two enemies that are putting the pincher thing on the nation. If that isn't bad enough, we have this other interesting guy that pops up. And he is a really interesting guy. Verse 26. Then Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite of Zeradah, Solomon's servant, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow, also rebelled against the king. Jeroboam is an interesting guy. Did you catch where he's from?
Ephraim.
Ephraim. Why does that matter?
Let's see.
Because he was a Jew himself.
Okay, he's a Jew.
And the northern tribes was right best.
Northern tribes, what we call the northern tribes. And why does Ephraim matter? Anybody know? Ephraim is one, of course, it's the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. They're the two half tribes of Joseph. Okay. Ephraim especially has evolved into the leader of the pack. Ephraim is, when something happens in that area up there, Ephraim is where the leadership starts to come from. They're one of the larger tribes, more successful ones, And they are the driving force in many of these others. You don't hear a whole lot about some of the others, but Ephraim is the key place up there.
Fierce fighters, I think they're described in Exodus.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah, these guys are warriors. They know how to fight. They've been great fighters for the nation as they come into the land.
They're one of the more numerous of the tribes as well, and probably provided a lot of labor for Solomon.
Yeah, interesting. And then one interesting thing to me, you all know where Jeroboam's going to end up, right? You've read ahead, and you know that he is going to be the leader. And for Mother's Day, this is the Mother's Day special. I told you it was in here somewhere. It tells us, interestingly enough, that his mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow. And you go, why? You know, it is the only king of the northern tribes whose mother is listed. Only one. All but one of the kings of Judah has their mother's name listed and revealed. There's only one missing. He's the only one of the northern tribes that his mother is mentioned. And she's a widow. And they're from Ephraim. And there has to be something to do with mom's influence on Jeroboam. And you would look at it from a world view and you would say it was positive, because you've got to look at this guy. He is an interesting guy. Fits the description of it. Let's jump down just a little bit. We're going to find out he rebelled, but look at verse 28. Now the man Jeroboam was a valiant warrior, just like we said, Ephraim. And when Solomon saw the young man was industrious, he's hardworking, he's a, quote, doer of work, is what the Hebrew word is there. He's a go-getter. He appointed him over all the forced labor of the house of Joseph, who is...
Wasn't Ephraim the son of Joseph that Jacob blessed?
Yep, Ephraim and Manasseh were the two,
Yes,
two boys.
Jacob Joseph wanted him to bless Manasseh,
Mhm.
and he
He
blessed
said, no,
Ephraim.
this one.
He was the older, Manasseh was the older.
Older one. Yeah, and he says, no, it's not. He had his arms like this, and he said, no, not that way. Yeah. So here's the guy, Ephraim. He's a warrior, and he gets the king's attention. He says, whoa, this guy, he's a hard worker, he's industrious, he's a go-getter. I want him, and I'm putting him over all the forced labor of that house. What's that mean? What forced labor? For what?
Well, they were building it all.
Do all the construction. Yeah, remember during all the construction of the temple and everything, they brought in everybody in their shifts to do work, and they had to have people over those guys to do shift. He was over Ephraim and Manasseh's group. And you got to have that in your mind first, because the verse we skipped tells you why Jeroboam became a problem for Solomon. And it seems weird when you first read it. It says, so, verse 27, now here's the reason he rebelled against the king. Solomon built the Millo and closed up the breach of the city of his father David. And you go, so he built a Millo. Who cares? What's a Millo? In between the Temple Mount and the city of David and the hill on the other side, the Temple Mount is up here, and there's a draw, kind of what they call the Tyropoean Valley, and then over here is Zion. And you had to go down there and up there to get over to the Temple Mount. Most of the experts believe that the Millo is not a wall, it's a landfill. And they leveled that critter out. And today it's full. It's not a valley there anymore. He leveled that out and he built up the breach of the city of his father David. He connected everything there with this huge landfill project. Who did it?
Carrying dirt.
Hauling dirt, packing dirt. Something about what Solomon decided to do. He built the temple, and if you read Ecclesiastes, what did he try to do to satisfy this drive within him? He said, I did building projects, and I did this, and I did that, and I did this. And if you will recall from your reading ahead, you read about Rehoboam. And when Rehoboam took over, this guy Jeroboam brought a whole bunch of the guys in and said, you are taxing us to death, both in physical labor and in your father Solomon just killing us with the labor and the cost of these things. Just back off and we'll serve you. Remember that? Mm-hmm. There it is. Right there. Says, you're killing us, Solomon. And he's industrious and he's dedicated to Ephraim. He's had a mother that's trained him. She's a widow. She's had to do it all. She's inspired this young man, obviously. And so he rebels against Solomon and said, we're not going to have that. You can't abuse us like this for this stupid landfill. That's what it appears is happening. There's friction over the cost, physical and financial, of doing Solomon's stuff. And where's Solomon when this is going on?
Eating grapes, probably.
He's eating grapes. Actually, you know what? He's probably off doing his studying the insect somewhere, and he's off doing this somewhere, and he's running around doing his political thing. And they're slaving out here. They're dying.
Sounds familiar.
Sounds familiar.
Today.
Yeah.
You have to keep up the political scene.
Yeah, got to keep all the stuff, attend all the banquets and do all the stuff. And he's interested in science, and he's interested in all these things. Hey, we're excited, we're coming to Sunday school. All right. Go, girls. Whoa, wrong turn. There we go. That was close. We almost didn't make it in the room. When your brakes don't hold, some of you missed that. When your brakes don't hold and you overshoot the door, it's really hard to get turned around without using the seat of your pants. Anyway, that was fun. So anyway, we got this friction going, and then all of a sudden, it jumps ahead and it tells us this other story related to Jeroboam. And so now you have to find out, what's God doing with this guy Jeroboam? And how's God looking at it? And God's trying to, remember, he's trying to get Solomon's attention. He says it came about at that time. Sounds like a fairy tale, doesn't it? When Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah the Shihonite found him on the road. So God's prophet, Ahijah, comes down and just happened to find him out there on the road. And Ahijah had clothed himself with a new cloak, and both of them were alone in the field. They're out there on the road, and he meets him and says, hey, Jeroboam, how you doing? He's got this brand new cloak on. Beautiful thing. Nice new cloak. And Ahijah says, I want to show you something, Jeroboam. And he takes hold of this new cloak that was on him, and he tore it up there in front of Jeroboam. He tore it into 12 pieces. And Jeroboam's got to go, this guy's out of his mind. Clothes are expensive. You just don't go around buy a new cloak and then just rip it up. I just see him with these pocket knives. Just
Was Ahijah, I guess that's how you say his name, was he equal to Nathan? I mean,
he would have been one of the prophets.
God's
Yeah,
prophets?
one of God's
Okay.
prophets.
I just
Yeah,
haven't heard of him.
it's one of God's guys.
And clothing in that day was a measure of your
Status,
yes,
wealth.
and wealth.
Yeah,
Their clothing was part of the.
right.
So it'd be an expensive thing. That was
Very,
done.
very much so. Yeah, it's to me, if you've been with us in the Philippines, this will speak to you, because over there people don't have cars, they don't have fancy housing and everything. What they have is their status symbol, and you think it's weird that the president's wife over there had a whole ton of shoes? It's clothes and shoes are all you can afford. So those are your status symbols. And these people that live in dirt poor situations show up on Sunday morning for church and they look just like us. Better. Dressed nice and better. Yeah, they'd show up. Wow. And that is their best clothes. That's the way this is. So you got to see this. Jeroboam's going, this is a poor prophet. They're not rich. And he's got this fabulous new silk. I don't know what it is.
It's often the thing that they wrapped around them when they slept.
So you slept, yeah, so it's life, it's everything. This is valuable. So you gotta get that in your brain. You know, you're just cutting up your brand new Maserati. Maybe your RV that you're gonna sleep in tonight, I don't know. So you got this status symbol, and he breaks out the torch, and he starts cutting it in 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam, there you go, Jeroboam. You pick out any 10 pieces you want. You take 10 pieces. Because thus says the Lord God of Israel, behold, I will tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and I'm going to give you 10 tribes. You're Jeroboam, and you're ticked at Solomon because of the way he's running the government and what he's doing to your nation, and you're fighting for Joseph. Ephraim and Manasseh, that's your battle, and he just handed you everybody else. Said you take 10 of them. The only ones I'm not giving you are Levi and Judah. You can have all the others. Take them. What do you do with that?
Ron,
Yeah.
Benjamin, was it in the 10 tribes?
Benjamin got torn both ways. Yeah. Some of Benjamin went this way. A few Benjamin came into Judah and were with them. So it was kind of torn. But
So what he's saying is he's taking the kingdom from Solomon and he's basically giving it to Jeroboam.
it's yours,
So
Jeroboam.
Jeroboam's the new anointed?
That's what he's saying. It's going to be yours. I'll give you, it says, in parentheses in 32, he will, it says, Solomon, I'm going to pull him out and I'm going to give him to you, but he will have one tribe for the sake of my servant David and the sake of Jerusalem, the city I have chosen from all the tribes of Israel. I'm going to keep my promise to David. Has nothing to do with the way Solomon's behaved, and because I made the promise to David to keep that line, I will honor that promise. You'll see that all the way through Kings and Chronicles. I'm going to do it. I don't care how bad they are. I kept my promise. So he says, I'm going to keep one. You get all the others. There you are. Because they've forsaken me. They've worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Milcom, the god of the sons of Ammon. And they have not walked in my ways, doing what is right in my sight, and observing my statutes and my ordinances, as his father David did. Nevertheless, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, but I will make him ruler all the days of his life for the sake of my servant David, whom I chose, and observe my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom from his son's hand, and I'll give it to you. 10 tribes. So there it is. Wow. And he goes on to say, his son, I'll give him one tribe, that's Judah. And my servant David may have a lamp always before me in Jerusalem, the city where I have chosen for myself to put my name. And I will take you, here you go, and you shall reign over whatsoever you desire, and you shall be king over Israel. And it will be that if you listen to all I command you, and walk in my ways, and do what is right in my sight, by observing my statutes and my commandments, as my servant David did, then I will be with you and build you an enduring house, as I built for David. I will give Israel to you. And I will afflict the descendants of David for this, but not always. He's saying, no kidding, I will give you the same promise I gave to David. Did you hear that? The same promise. I'll build you an enduring line, and the promise to David was you will always have one of your line ruling over Israel. He says, I'll have it all the way except for one thing. I made my promise to David, and that one promised one is still going to be there.
it's conditional,
Wow.
though. It's conditional.
Conditional, just like it was for David. You all and your sons have to follow my commandments. You do what I've taught you to do, and you stay faithful to me, and you will have it.
And this Jeroboam had nothing to do with family, it was just one man picked out of the entire nation.
It's Jeroboam that showed leadership, that out of the tribe of Ephraim, the leader tribe, and those 10, influential guy, and God came to him in grace and said, Jeroboam, I've looked at you, I've seen, it probably tells you that God looked at what Jeroboam was rebelling over and says, you have a just cause. You're right to be upset about that. And I'm going to hand you 10 tribes. You can lead them if you'll follow me. I give them to you. Well, the word trickles back to Solomon. And you would think that Solomon would look at some of these things and compare that and go, wait a minute, God made me a promise twice. 2 times he was told the same thing. At the beginning and right after the dedication of the temple, God came to him and said, Solomon, here's the deal. If you will follow me, then you will always have someone on the throne. I will be there and you'll always have it. And Solomon gets word back. I don't know how it got back, but it comes back to Solomon that this guy has been chosen to take 10 tribes. Did you hear? Jeroboam's been, the priest, or not the priest, the prophet, just handed Jeroboam 10 tribes, took them away from your son. And you would have thought Solomon would have gone, oh my gosh, how can that be? And fall on his face before God and say, I am so wrong. Do you know what? You want to see why I don't think Solomon did a recover at the end of his life, at the end of his time as king? Well, I think he started out, he hit his peak because he built that temple, and it was a downhill slide. Ecclesiastes ends with a miserable old age. You know why I think that? Because it says right here, Solomon heard about that. In verse 40, sought therefore to put Jeroboam to death. But Jeroboam arose and fled to Egypt, to Shishak, king of Egypt, and he was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. He had to get out of town physically because Solomon was after him. Solomon's way to solve the problem was kill him. I'm not going to have that. And Solomon, you got told twice in a vision by God. Hello. No. Wow. Isn't that something?
Kind of the way he started it. I mean, you know, too. He had opposition, kill them all.
You had to clean them out, huh?
Joab.
Yeah. He had to deal with some difficult things. He just took out the one little part about whether he was called to clean house or whether he called himself to clean house. So what? Fascinating story, right? I mean, just like a TV drama. All the tug of war and things going on here. Enemies outside, enemies inside. Poor old Solomon just getting beat up all over the place. He's writing Ecclesiastes about how miserable it is to get old and creaky and blind and deaf and all that sort of thing. And he just, yeah, it's a sympathetic guy. You got to feel so sorry for him. Just like us, isn't it? How many times, he got told how many times, we are told every time we open this book what God has promised us. You know, Caleb's been leading us through Ephesians with all these amazing promises of what God has offered us and given us. And so you would think that when the wireworms start attacking your wheat and wiping out your crop, you'd say, Lord, you know, you promised to take care of us, and you said the lilies would be clothed better. You know, he takes care of all these little birds, and he's going to take care of us. So the first thought in your mind when you find out your crop is going to just be a disaster this year is, all right, Lord, it's yours. Where do we go from here?
It should be.
Instead, it's, oh no! What are we going to do? Ah!
And immediately try all these things.
Yeah. Let's see, can we spray something on it? What are we going to do? Oh my gosh, you know, call the insurance man. And then after that, you go, well, wait a minute. You know, hopefully. And you recover. But the first human gut reaction is when something happens, what did I do to deserve this? I didn't deserve this. Wow. We're just like that, aren't we? And the question is not, is it going to happen to us? Are we going to react that way? I will tell you, if you are a human being somewhere along in your life, yes, you're going to react like that. The question is, are you going to rebound like David did? Or are you going to do Solomon's thing and just all the way to the end?
See,
Down him.
what God said is nothing.
Yeah.
Turn away.
Yeah. Just, I don't think it's important anymore. It's more important to do this other stuff. You know, that's the question. Are we going to listen to God and say, okay, God, I trust you, whatever I got to go through, wherever's happening, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to try to follow you as best I'm able and listen to what you're telling me. I'm going to read what you're telling me, and I'm going to hang on. You know, it'll make a difference because I already saw it in the comments that Jane made, that people come into his room, the doctors and nurses and folks that know what Pastor Paul's going through, and go, how is he so relaxed and so calm and so cheerful about what's going on? Does he understand? This is not good. And he goes, yeah, he does. He does. And now we got the doctor that's taking care of this thing, telling him, when you preach your first sermon after this is over, the nurse and I are going to come sit in the front row and listen. He's not a Christian man. I mean, you will make an impact on your world. And it'll make a difference for your God, and people will praise your God because they will see it in you. And you get to enjoy watching him work. It may not be easy, it may not be fun, if you will, but you get the pleasure, the opportunity to see God work in your life. So let's hang on and try to keep our focus and be like David. With that, we are about out of time. And I got one request of the guys. You notice we are all shuffling chairs. The Spanish church has their Mother's Day luncheon outside in the back, and we robbed chairs from them, and they're probably going to need some more out there. So if you guys kind of check that out and take out whatever they're going to need out there, that would be great when we get done. Let's close in prayer. Father, we thank you for our time together this morning, and for your grace in giving us living illustrations of your heart's desire for us, that we would follow you with all our hearts, not that we'd be perfect, not that we would never fall or make a wrong decision or act out of wrong motives, because that old nature in us is so powerful. You understood it was going to be a problem. You gave us verses like 1 John 1:9, and whoever confesses their sin, that you are faithful and just to forgive it and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. We praise you for that, Father, that you took us from where we were in the slave market of sin, that you bought us out of that. You purchased that with our Savior Christ's death on the cross. And we are now in your family. Father, thank you that we are there, that you train us, you discipline us, you bring us along in this life and prepare us for eternity with you. Give us ears to hear, give us hearts that want to hear, and that want to do your will, so that when that prophet comes along to us and shakes us and says, this is you need to straighten up, that we will listen to them, that we'll listen to that word that you provide us, and that we will willingly follow you. We thank you, Father, for our time this morning. In Jesus' name.